The things that I love in your character is that the limbo for her in the movie, it's more an escape than, in the comics, it's like a prison. So do you think that this change comes with, the need of escape from reality that all we have right now, but the movie was shot 3 years ago, but still it's something that we crave? Don't you think that is for this reason?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I think everybody processes trauma differently. And that actually is something that we share. She escapes into limbo, I escape into films and books and any kind of art. But I do think people will have a different understanding of what it's like to be potentially locked up with a whole bunch of people for a long period of time. And maybe that will make them slightly more forgiving about how intense and aggressive we are to each other.
Questo non è un ospedale, è un carcere.
Magic
sure.
It's really different. Like in the movie, it's a sort of escape from reality, from a trauma that she has.
Yes.
But in the comics, it's more like a demoniac prison.
Yes.
So, and this one was
also a good example is like Lockheed's in the movie, the dragon. So in the comic, this dragon in the comic came from outer space. Kitty Pryde was the original owner. Eventually, it came to Illyana. I have no way to cover that in a movie. I have no way to make that make sense in a movie. All these stories, the origin stories, we really did use those origin stories. Even Illyana's origin story has all the elements of her origin story from the comics. We've just tried to make it a more grounded, character-driven origin story where she was very much subjected to trafficking when she was a kid. She was trapped in a place where her daily fate and routine was controlled by other people, and she would escape to this place in her imagination that as her power grew, this place became more and more real until she was able to use it to escape and to kill all these men and get out. So she was the most tailor-made to already be a superhero than the other characters because she'd already used her powers in battle and all that, and all the other characters never have. It wasn't intended to come out right now, but it is very much about kids who are trapped in an institution that they can't leave because they're quarantined because they're sick, basically. So I didn't mean for it to reflect anything current, but somehow I guess I did. I have also The Stand coming out in the fall, which is about a pandemic. So the last two that I've made have had a weird, the repercussions in the real world.
Next time, a fairy tale, please.
Yeah, I'm gonna have to do something a little further out next time.
But I think that it's for everybody. Be a teenager, it's a little bit horror in a certain way. But you had the to translate the teenagers of the 80s from the comics and bring these new mutants like millennials. So how did you work with that aspect? It's really a translation, actually.
Well, it's funny. I think you watch those John Hughes movies and you still feel all the same things you'd feel now when you were growing up, or if you watch Say Anything or any of those classic sort of teen movies from back in the day. They're movies that were friends to me when I was young and I was a teenager and I was feeling awkward or feeling not, you feel weird in your own body when you're a kid, like all those things. So it's like I wanted this movie to also be a friend to kids the way these movies were friends to me when I was trying to get through high school and all that stuff.
As well, that you have studied so much, not just the script, also that. And in your opinion, since you actually portrayed millennials in this case, how much teenagers are different from the comics that they were like out in the 80s? So does teenager, in your opinion, have changed a little bit, or?
I mean, from what I learned in the comics, it was just the things of what not to do, in the movie, in the sense of I had to just study the background of my character. I wasn't studying the teenagers of the 80s per se, but I think the millennials are being constantly distracted by the digital world and the pressing of how you should look like on Instagram or things like that. And I think those insecurities are very much portrayed in our movie too, in the way that like our bodies are changing. How do we react to these growing pains as well as our traumas? I don't know. It's a hard question to differentiate the 80s. I didn't live in the 80s, so I don't know how hard it was then, but certainly without the technological aspect of it must have been slightly easier, maybe, you know.